When I heard the news, it wasn't a shock, it was a confirmation. It was the final, cold piece of evidence I needed to accept a truth I had been running from for 5 long years. My son, David, called to tell me he and his wife, Chloe, had finally bought their first house. "It's a fixer-upper, Mom," he said, his voice bright and careless, "but it's ours." I should have been thrilled. A mother's heart is supposed to swell with pride at such milestones. But all I felt was a hollow ache, a weariness that settled deep in my bones. I had spent the last 5 years pouring my late husband's pension money into their lives, money that was supposed to be my security, my comfort, my quiet dignity in old age. I had paid off Max's student loans, covered Chloe's endless medical deductibles, and bylaid them out of countless emergencies that always seemed to coincide with a new gadget release or a sudden, unexplained trip. The real sting, the final confirmation of my invisibility, came when David added, "We didn't want to bother you with the closing, Mom. It was a very complicated process." Bother me. The woman who had given them over $40,000 in 5 years. The woman who had sacrificed her own peace of mind, her own small pleasures, was a bother. I stood in my small, quiet kitchen, holding the phone, the receiver feeling heavy and cold against my ear. I looked at the faded photograph of my husband, Robert, on the counter. His eyes, so kind and steady, seemed to look right through me, a silent question hanging in the air. "Martha, what have you done with the life I left you?" Robert had left me this house, our house, and a modest but secure pension meant to last me through my final years. It was a legacy of love and foresight. And I, in my foolish, desperate attempt to hold onto a son who was already gone, had treated it like an endless bank account for him and his wife. I had confused my role. I wasn't a mother anymore. I was a financial resource. The real betrayal, the one that finally snapped the thread of my patience, came 2 weeks later. I was having my usual Tuesday morning coffee with my neighbor, Beatrice. Beatrice is a woman of quiet strength, a widow like me, but one who had drawn firm, clear lines around her life. She was scrolling through her phone, and then she stopped, her brow furrowed. "Martha," she said, her voice low, "did you see this?" It was a post on Chloe's social media. A photo of David and Chloe standing in front of their new house, a sprawling 2-story structure with a manicured lawn. They were holding a sign that read, "Our new beginning." Thanks to the generous support of Chloe's parents, we finally did it. I stared at the screen. There was no mention of me. No thank you for the $15,000 down payment I had quietly wired them just 3 months prior. Money I had pulled from Robert's emergency fund. I was erased from their narrative. I was the silent, invisible ATM that they preferred to keep hidden in the back room. I was not a person, I was a transaction. That night, I didn't cry. The tears had dried up long ago, replaced by a cold, hard resolve that settled in my chest like a stone. I had been a fool, yes, but a fool who was finally waking up. I had confused financial support with love. I had bought their presence, their calls, their occasional visits. and they had accepted the transaction without a second thought, without a shred of gratitude. I sat at my dining table, the same table where I had helped David with his homework, where Robert and I had planned our retirement, and where I had recently sat counting bills, trying to figure out how to make my pension stretch to cover their latest crisis. I took out my checkbook and my bank statements. I wanted to see the numbers, the cold, hard evidence of my foolishness. $40,000. That was the conservative estimate. $40,000 that could have been a trip to Italy, a new roof, or a cushion for my own medical needs. Instead, it was gone, swallowed by the bottomless pit of their entitlement. The next morning, I went to the bank. I walked past the tellers, past the velvet ropes, and straight into Mr. Evans' office. He looked up, his expression a mixture of surprise and professional concern. "Mrs. Miller," he said, "what can I do for you?" "Mr. Evans," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. "I need you to cancel every single automatic transfer to David and Chloe's accounts. Every one of them, effective immediately." He looked over his glasses, his eyes searching mine. "Are you certain, Mrs. Miller? These transfers have been like clockwork for years. Is everything all right?" "I am certain, Mr. Evans," I repeated, a small, genuine smile touching my lips. "I've decided it's time for my clock to keep its own time." He processed the cancellations, his pen scratching across the paper, and with every stroke, I felt a chain fall away. I also changed all my passwords, set up a new, separate account for my pension deposits, and signed a document that blocked any third-party access to my accounts. I was building a wall, brick by financial brick, and for the first time in years, I felt safe behind it. The calls started immediately. It was as if they had a financial radar that pinged the moment their source of income was threatened. First, a text from David, barely an hour after I left the bank. "Mom, the auto-pay for the mortgage didn't go through. Did you forget to transfer the usual amount? Call me." I didn't reply. I simply deleted the message. Then came Chloe, her voice tight with panic, a thin veneer of sweetness barely covering the rage underneath. "Martha, what is going on? The car payment bounced. You know we can't afford this without your help. This is irresponsible. You need to fix this right now. Irresponsible." The word stung, but it also fueled my resolve. They had the audacity to call me irresponsible. I took a deep breath, letting the silence stretch for a moment. "Chloe," I said, my voice calm and steady, a tone I hadn't used with her before. "I've decided that my money is no longer available to finance the lives of two perfectly capable adults. I'm only helping special people now, and I've realized that special people don't erase me from their lives." The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I had heard in years. It was the sound of a spoiled child realizing the candy store was closed. "Martha, you don't mean that," she finally stammered, the panic now fully exposed. "We love you. We just had a lot going on with the house. We'll make it up to you, just send the money." "No, Chloe," I said gently, "I do mean it, and there is nothing to make up. The transaction is over." I hung up the phone. 3 days later, I came home from the grocery store to find a strange, expensive black sedan in my driveway. My heart gave a familiar lurch of fear, but it was quickly replaced by a surge of anger. David and Chloe were inside my house, along with a man in a sharp, expensive suit. They had used the spare key I had given them years ago, the key I had trusted them with. "Mom, thank God you're here," David said, his face pale and slick with sweat. "This is Mr. Thompson, our financial consultant. We need to talk about your recent erratic behavior." Mr. Thompson, a man in his late 40s with a condescending smile that didn't reach his eyes, approached me. "Mrs. Miller, your children are deeply concerned about your sudden, drastic financial decisions. They believe your judgment may be impaired, and they have asked me to assess the situation." I looked at the three of them, my son, his wife, and the hired gun, standing in my living room, the room I had paid for, the room where I had raised my family, trying to steal my future. "My judgment is clearer than it has been in years," I said, my voice low and dangerous. I walked past them to the phone on the wall. "You have exactly 5 minutes to leave my property before I call the police and file a restraining order. And Mr. Thompson, you are trespassing and looking at my private documents without my consent. That is a crime. A federal crime, in fact, when it involves a senior citizen." Chloe burst into tears, a dramatic, performative wail. "Martha, you can't do this. We have bills. We have the house. Everything you have will be ours anyway. We're just trying to protect your assets." "Protect my assets?" I laughed, a dry, harsh sound that echoed in the quiet room. "You're trying to speed up my death so you can collect. Get out." They left, but not before David turned back, his face contorted with a rage that was both familiar and terrifying. "You'll regret this, Mom. You'll be alone and you'll have no one." "I'm already alone, David," I whispered, the sadness finally breaking through the anger. "But now I'm free." The next morning, I called my own lawyer, Mr. Harrison. He specialized in elder law and was appalled by their actions. "Mrs. Miller, this is a clear case of elder financial abuse. We will fight this, and we will win." We changed the locks, installed a camera system, and began documenting every single interaction. I started spending time with Beatrice, who introduced me to her book club, a group of strong, independent women who had all faced similar family challenges. They became my new family, a family of choice, not of the silence after I hung up on Chloe was the first true silence I had experienced in years. It wasn't the absence of sound, but the absence of demand. For 5 years, my life had been a constant, low-level hum of anxiety, a perpetual state of readiness for the next financial emergency. Now the hum was gone. I sat at my kitchen table, the sunlight streaming in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, and I felt a profound, almost dizzying sense of peace. I thought about the word irresponsible that Chloe had thrown at me. She had meant it as an accusation, a weapon. But I realized that for 5 years, I had been the irresponsible one. I had been irresponsible with Robert's legacy, irresponsible with my own future, and most of all, irresponsible with my son's character. I had taught him that his mother was a safety net, a resource to be exploited, rather than a person to be cherished. I had confused my love with a bank loan. I spent the rest of that day doing things I hadn't allowed myself to do. I put on a record, an old jazz album Robert loved, and I danced, slowly, awkwardly, in my living room. I called my sister, Alina, whom I hadn't spoken to properly in months, and told her everything. "Oh, Martha," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I knew it. Every time you talked about them, it was always about what you gave them, never what they did for you. You bought their love, honey, and now you've canceled the subscription." Her bluntness, though painful, was exactly what I needed. She confirmed the truth I had been too afraid to speak aloud. The realization was a bitter pill, but it was also a powerful medicine. I had been living a lie, and the lie was that I was indispensable. The truth was, I was just a convenience. The next morning, when Mr. Harrison, my lawyer, arrived, I was ready. He was a kind man, with a silver-streaked beard and the weary eyes of someone who had seen the worst of human nature. He specialized in elder law, which meant he had seen this story play out countless times. The story of the loving parent, the entitled child, and the inevitable, painful collision. "Mrs. Miller," he said, reviewing the documents I had meticulously prepared, the bank statements, the canceled checks, the text messages. "The evidence is overwhelming. This is textbook elder financial abuse, but we need to be prepared. They will escalate. They will try to make you look crazy." "They already tried," I said, recounting the visit from Mr. Thompson. "They used the spare key and broke into my house." Mr. Harrison's face hardened. "That is criminal trespass. We will file a police report immediately. We will also file for a temporary restraining order. They are not to come within 50 feet of you or your property." The process of filing the police report was surreal. Sitting in the station, describing how my own son and daughter-in-law had violated my home, felt like a scene from a bad movie. But the officer, a young woman with a kind face, treated me with respect and seriousness. She made me feel like a victim, not a hysterical old woman. She validated my fear, and in that validation, I found a new layer of strength. Over the next few weeks, the silence from David and Chloe was replaced by a barrage of legal threats. Letters arrived daily, filled with aggressive, accusatory language. They demanded repayment for loans they claimed I owed them. They threatened to sue for emotional distress. They even tried to claim ownership of the living room furniture I had bought them 5 years ago, arguing it was a gift in contemplation of continued support. I would take each letter, read it calmly, and hand it to Mr. Harrison. He was my shield, my fortress against their relentless assault. "They are desperate, Martha," he explained. "They are spending money they don't have on a lawyer who is just milking them. Every aggressive move they make strengthens our case. They are proving our point for us, that their only interest is your money." But the emotional toll was immense. I would wake up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding, replaying every cruel word, every moment of betrayal. I felt a profound sense of loss, not just of my son, but of the idea of my son. The boy who used to bring me dandelions and tell me I was the best mom in the world was gone, replaced by a stranger motivated by pure, unadulterated greed. It was a grief as sharp and deep as any death. I would sit for hours in Robert's old armchair, tracing the worn pattern on the armrest. Robert, he was the anchor I had lost. He had a quiet, steady wisdom that I had desperately missed. He would have seen through Chloe instantly. He would have stopped me from giving them the first dime. But he was gone, and I was left to navigate this treacherous sea alone. I realized then that my generosity to David wasn't just about love. It was about trying to fill the Robert-shaped hole in my life. I was trying to buy back the feeling of being needed, of being the center of a family, a feeling that had vanished the day Robert died. I remembered a conversation we had years ago when David was just starting college. Robert had said, "Martha, our job isn't to make life easy for him. Our job is to make him strong enough to handle a hard life. We give him roots, not wings of gold." I had forgotten that wisdom. I had given David wings of gold, and they had melted the moment he had to fly on his own. It was Beatrice who saved me from sinking into that grief. She introduced me to her book club, a small circle of women who met every Thursday. They weren't just reading books, they were sharing their lives, their scars, and their hard-won wisdom. "We call ourselves the Phoenix Club," Beatrice explained, pouring me a cup of tea. "Because we've all had to burn down our old lives to rise from the ashes." In that room, I met Maria, who had been cut off by her own daughter after refusing to co-sign a massive business loan. Maria's pain was a mirror of mine, but her resilience was a beacon. She spoke of the years she spent trying to earn her daughter's approval, only to realize that the approval she truly needed was her own. I met Carmen, who had discovered her husband was using their retirement savings to fund a secret life. Carmen's story was a lesson in self-trust. She had ignored the small, persistent voice of doubt for years, the voice that told her something was wrong. Now, she was learning to listen to that voice, to honor her own intuition. Their stories were different, but the core theme was the same: the pain of betrayal by those you love most, and the fierce, unexpected strength that comes from choosing yourself. "What hurts the most," I confessed to them one evening, my voice cracking, "is realizing that I was never loved for me, only for what I could provide. I feel like a fool, a complete and utter fool." Alfreda, the oldest and wisest of the group, took my hand. Her skin was soft and wrinkled, a map of a life well lived. "Martha, my dear, you have to stop thinking about what you lost. You didn't lose love, you lost an illusion. True love is free. What you were paying for was attention, and that attention was never worth the price." Her words were a revelation. I had been paying a fortune for a cheap imitation of love. The money was gone, but the lesson was priceless. I realized that the $40,000 wasn't just a financial loss. It was the tuition for the most important course of my life. Self-respect 101. I started to invest in myself. I joined a painting class, something I had put off for 20 years, because I always needed to save that money for David's next emergency. I bought myself a new wardrobe, replacing the drab, worn clothes I had worn for years. I started to see myself not as a fading widow, but as Martha Miller, a woman with her own interests, her own money, and her own future. I was reclaiming my identity, one small, defiant act at a time. I remembered the first time I went to the painting class. I was terrified. I hadn't held a brush since high school. The instructor, a vibrant young woman named Lena, handed me a canvas and a palette. "Just paint what you feel, Martha," she said. I painted a wall, a thick, gray, impenetrable wall. It was the wall I was building around my heart, around my finances, around my future. It wasn't beautiful, but it was honest. And for the first time, I felt a flicker of pride in something that was purely mine. The day the social worker, Miss Schmidt, arrived was a calculated move by David and Chloe. They had escalated the fight to the state level, hoping to use the government to declare me incompetent. It was a desperate, ugly tactic, a final attempt to use the system to steal what they couldn't earn. I opened the door to Miss Schmidt, a young woman with a clipboard and a look of professional skepticism. She sat in my living room, asking me questions that were clearly designed to trip me up, to find the cracks in my composure. "Mrs. Miller, your family reports a sudden, irrational change in your financial behavior. Can you explain why you stopped supporting your son?" "Miss Schmidt," I said, my voice calm, my gaze steady. "My son is 35 years old, married, and a college graduate. He is perfectly capable of supporting himself. My decision to stop funding his adult life is not irrational. It is the most rational decision I have made in 5 years. It is a decision to protect my own financial future, a future my late husband worked hard to secure for me." She then asked about the security cameras, the restraining order, and my new friends. I explained everything with the clarity and precision of a CEO presenting a quarterly report. I had nothing to hide, and the truth was my greatest weapon. The cameras are a direct result of my son and daughter-in-law breaking into my home. The restraining order is a legal necessity to protect myself from harassment. And my friends are a support group for women who have been victims of elder financial abuse. I presented her with Mr. Harrison's file, which contained the police report, the bank statements, and the doctor's note confirming my perfect cognitive health. Miss Schmidt closed her folder, her skepticism replaced by a look of quiet understanding. "Mrs. Miller," she said, "I see no indication of mental incompetence or a need for intervention. I will be closing this case." It was a victory, a small one, but it was mine. I had faced the system, and the system had seen the truth. Mr. Harrison warned me it was only the beginning. "They are desperate, Martha. They have no income, they are facing foreclosure, and they have spent a fortune on legal fees. They will file the incompetence lawsuit. It's their last, desperate move." The thought of facing my son in court, of having my life put on trial, was terrifying. But I was no longer the woman who cried in her kitchen. I was a phoenix, and I was ready for the fire. I had a new family, a new purpose, and a lawyer who believed in me. I was armed with the truth, and the truth, I was learning, was the sharpest weapon of all. I spent the weeks leading up to the trial preparing my testimony. Mr. Harrison didn't want me to memorize anything. He wanted me to speak from the heart, but with facts. We went over the timeline again and again: the down payment, the social media post, the bounced checks, the break-in. Each event was a bead on a string, forming a clear, undeniable pattern of exploitation. I also spent time with Alfreda. She told me about her own court battle with a manipulative nephew. "They will try to make you angry, Martha," she warned. "They will try to make you cry. They want the judge to see an emotional, unstable woman. You must be the rock. You must be the calmest person in that room." "How?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You look at them," she said, her eyes piercing, "and you see them not as your son and his wife, but as two strangers who are trying to steal from a 75-year-old woman. You detach the love, and you attach the facts." I practiced this detachment in the mirror. I practiced saying the words. I stopped because I realized that my love was being measured by my bank account, until they were just words, devoid of pain. The day before the hearing, I received a certified letter. It was a notice of foreclosure on David and Chloe's new house. They had missed 3 mortgage payments. They had been so focused on stealing my money that they had forgotten to manage their own. The irony was a bitter, satisfying taste in my mouth. They had destroyed their own future in their greedy pursuit of mine. The next morning, in the courtroom, their lawyer painted me as a senile, manipulated old woman. David and Chloe cried on the stand, claiming they only wanted to help their confused mother. When it was my turn, Mr. Harrison guided me. I presented my meticulously kept financial records, showing the $40,000 in gifts. I presented the statement from my doctor confirming my perfect cognitive health. I presented the police report from the day they broke into my house. "Mrs. Miller," the judge asked, "why did you stop the financial support?" "Your Honor," I said, looking directly at David and Chloe, "I stopped because I realized that my love was being measured by my bank account. I stopped because I wanted my son to learn the value of honest work, something he could never do while living off his mother's pension. And I stopped because I realized that if I didn't protect myself, no one would." The judge retired to deliberate. The wait was agonizing. I sat next to Mr. Harrison, my hands clasped tightly, watching David and Chloe across the room. They were whispering furiously with their lawyer, their faces a mask of panic. When the judge returned, the courtroom fell silent. "After reviewing all the evidence presented," she began, "it is obvious to this court that Mrs. Martha Miller is in full possession of her mental faculties. Her financial decisions, as painful as they may be for her family, are completely rational and within her rights." She paused, looking directly at David and Chloe. "Furthermore, the evidence suggests that this lawsuit is motivated by financial interest rather than by genuine concern for Mrs. Miller's well-being. The court completely denies the request for guardianship." The moment Judge Thompson's gavel struck the wood, a sound that was both final and liberating, I felt a physical weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't just the weight of the lawsuit. It was the weight of 5 years of self-deception, of fear, and of misplaced hope. I had walked into that courtroom carrying the burden of a mother who believed she had failed her son. I walked out as a woman who had finally succeeded in protecting herself. I didn't look at David or Chloe as I left. I couldn't. Mr. Harrison gently guided me through the throng of people, his hand steady on my arm. The victory was mine, but the cost was the final, undeniable severing of the bond with my son. I had won my money, my house, and my sanity, but I had lost the idea of my family. And that loss, even though it was necessary, was a profound, aching emptiness. We went back to Mr. Harrison's office. He poured me a glass of water, his expression one of quiet triumph. "You were magnificent, Martha. You were the calmest person in that room. You spoke the truth, and the truth won." "The truth is a sharp weapon, Mr. Harrison," I said, my voice hoarse. "But it cuts both ways." I sat there for a long time, staring out the window at the busy city street. I thought about David. I thought about the boy who used to sit on my lap, his small hand tracing the lines on my face. Where had that boy gone? When had the need for money replaced the need for his mother's love? I realized it wasn't a sudden change. It was a slow, insidious rot that I had enabled with every check I wrote. I had tried to buy happiness for him, and in doing so, I had bought his ruin. The house, our house, the house Robert and I had built our life in. It was the next decision. I had won the right to keep it, but did I want it? Every room was a museum of memories, but now every corner was also tainted by the memory of betrayal. The kitchen where I had received David's call. The living room where he and Chloe had stood with that hired gun, trying to declare me incompetent. The spare key under the ceramic bird, a symbol of my misplaced trust. I called Beatrice that evening. "I'm selling the house," I told her. "Good," she said, without hesitation. "It's a cage now, Martha. a beautiful, expensive cage you need to fly. The process of selling was surprisingly quick. I didn't hold a garage sale. I didn't linger over every item. I donated most of the furniture, keeping only a few precious things: Robert's armchair, the faded photograph, and the jazz records. I wanted a clean break, a fresh start unburdened by the ghosts of my past mistakes. I used the money to buy a small, two-bedroom condo near the ocean, something Robert and I had always dreamed of. It wasn't a grand house, but it had a balcony that overlooked the water, and the air smelled of salt and freedom. This was the dream Robert and I had shared, a quiet retirement by the sea, painting and reading and watching the sunset. I was finally living the life he had intended for me, a life I had almost forfeited in my desperation to cling to a son who no longer wanted me. I spent the first few weeks in the condo, just listening to the ocean. The rhythm of the waves was a constant, soothing reminder that life moves on, that the tide always turns. I started painting again, not the gray, angry wall of my past, but the vibrant blues and greens of the sea. The Phoenix Club women Beatrice, Maria, Carmen, and Alfreda came to visit. They sat on my new balcony, sipping iced tea, and we talked not about betrayal, but about the future. They were my true family now, a sisterhood. Maria, who had struggled with the loss of her daughter, looked out at the ocean and said, "You know, Martha, the hardest thing is realizing that you can't save them from themselves. You can only save yourself." Carmen, the one who had learned to trust her intuition, added, "And the greatest gift you can give them is the example of a woman who chose her own dignity over their drama." Alfreda, the wise one, simply smiled. "You didn't lose a son, dear. You gained a life." I thought about that. I had spent so long mourning the loss of David that I hadn't celebrated the birth of Martha, the woman who was now painting, traveling, and laughing with her friends, the woman who was no longer afraid of the phone ringing. I realized that the most profound act of love I could perform for David was the act of letting go. By refusing to be his safety net, I had forced him to stand on his own. It was a harsh lesson, a painful one, but it was the only lesson that could save him. I had given him the gift of adversity, the only gift that could truly teach him independence and respect. I often sit on my balcony now, watching the fishing boats go out in the early morning mist, and I reflect on the nature of motherhood. We are taught that a mother's love is unconditional, a boundless well from which our children can always draw. And I believe that. But I also believe that unconditional love does not mean unconditional funding. It does not mean unconditional tolerance for abuse. I had confused my identity as a mother with my function as a provider. I had allowed David and Chloe to define my worth by my utility. And when I finally withdrew that utility, their reaction was not sadness, but rage, the rage of a person whose tool has broken. That distinction, that painful clarity, was the final gift of my ordeal. I think about the concept of wealth. For years, I thought wealth was the number in my bank account, the pension Robert left me. David and Chloe certainly thought so. But now my wealth is the time I spend painting, the laughter I share with Beatrice, the quiet confidence I feel when I walk into a room. My wealth is the absence of fear. It is the knowledge that I am self-sufficient and that my happiness is not contingent on anyone else's approval or presence. I am often asked if I regret the money I gave them. No, I regret the reason I gave it. I regret the fear that drove me to try and purchase a relationship. But the money itself, it was the price of my education. It bought me the lesson that set me free. It was the most expensive and the most valuable tuition I have ever paid. I have not heard from David or Chloe directly. The silence is complete. It is the silence of a door that has been permanently closed. I heard through a distant acquaintance that they lost the house and had to move into a small, two-bedroom apartment. David had to take a second job, and Chloe had to work for the first time since they were married. I don't wish them ill. I truly don't. But I hope that the adversity they face will finally teach them the value of independence and respect. I hope that David, stripped of his golden wings, will finally find his roots. I hope he learns that the dignity of earning $1 is worth more than the shame of begging for one. I am Martha. I am 75 years old, and I have learned that the most important inheritance you can leave your children is not money, but the example of a life lived with dignity. True love is not bought, it is earned, and my freedom is priceless. If you liked my story, you can support me by making a donation so I can write more stories. Thank you in advance. And you, what would you do in this person's place? I would love to hear your opinion, so please share it with me in the comments. I'm always curious about what you all think, and also write me where you heard this story. For more life stories like this, like the video and subscribe to my channel. There are many other stories waiting for you, with heartfelt greetings. Until next time.